Greetings. This is Alex, and welcome to the landfill. So tonight I think I'd like to talk a little bit about the martial arts. Now, my own background in martial arts is mostly, Eastern styles, Japanese, Chinese, Korean, and a little Western fighting thrown in there. But one of the more disappointing things that I've encountered in my years of investigating and studying the martial arts is the way in which various terminology is used, or more precisely, the way it isn't used. More and more, I've been finding that too many instructors in the U.S. are abandoning the traditional terminology in favor of terminology in English. While I do not object to the usage of English terminology in conjunction with the terminology of the language of the country where the style originated, I do object to specifically supplanting it with English. Now, I am particularly indebted to two of my instructors. Korean style I studied, Hwarang Do. I was taught by Sabanam Aaron Flores. And when I studied Choi Li Fut Kung Fu, I studied under the late Master Fred Spencer. And one of the things that I'm indebted to these two men for is that they were very insistent that we as students knew the proper terminology. In Choi Li Fut, we had to know the Chinese names for the techniques, and in the Hwarang Do, we had to know the Korean names, and they would use the terms, interchangeably. So we never know if, when they were telling us, to practice a particular technique or to do a particular technique, if they were going to throw the Chinese or the English name or the Korean or the English name at us. So we had to know and be ready for it. And over the years, I've encountered, and acquired many books and videos on martial arts, and far too many either use only the English terminology, or in some cases, they don't use any terminology more descriptive than the words kick, punch, and block. And this came to my mind particularly. There's a former movie actor and martial arts instructor named Ron Van Cleef, who teaches a style called Chinese Goju. And in one of his videotapes, he was describing a particular technique called the bear paw. And he gave the Chinese name for it, but then he specifically said that, or the Japanese name for it, but then he specifically said, but I don't use Japanese terminology. And in the 5 videos of his for that series, that style that I have, and the 2 books of his that I have, and other things that I've seen, he never once used either a Chinese or a Japanese term for the techniques that he was using. Everything was in English. And I was very disappointed by that, to be perfectly honest. And this is all part of what I've come to see as a decline in martial arts. It amazes me how someone can become a karate instructor and not even know a single Japanese term, other than knowing that the training hall is called a dojo and the outfit you're wearing is called a gi. What amazes me more is how someone that does know the terminology would be so unwilling to include it in their students' education. Knowing that terminology is an important part of the training. It shows an ability to go outside what one is used to gain something new. Fortunately, there are still some styles that retain a strong enough connection to their traditional roots that this is not an issue. Some of that is because there is an official governing body overseeing the style, and that there is a rigorous training process. Iaido is a prime example of that, the art of Japanese sword drawing, where you learn to draw the sword, and you develop that speed. Their testing process, you have to know all of the terms in Japanese. And in some styles, you even have to be able to write out your answers to the written test in Japanese. So they are very, very strict in their tradition. They don't want to change it. And while there has been a change where they will use the terminology of whatever country they're teaching in, you still have to know all the Japanese as well. And the same applies in other Japanese martial arts. I have noticed that there are still some of the very hardcore styles, especially Isshinryu, Gojuru, and Shotokan, where the Japanese terminology is a must. In fact, I find it more likely that it is the Chinese styles that will switch over to using more English terminology or terminology for the country that they're in, and ignore the terminology in their own language, in the language of the style. And that, I find that kind of sad. I mean, if one breaks away from the main body of the style, then they're no longer subject to those rules, and sometimes they will change and stop using the traditional terms. And sometimes, as long as they can afford to open a school, they can do as they please, which all too often means foregoing aspects of teaching in favor of increasing their class sizes. And unfortunately, there are people who are put off by the terminology, the foreign terminology, trying to learn the Japanese or the Chinese, the Korean, or whatever other terms. And that's unfortunate that they're put off by that, because, again, it's a very important part, and it helps expand, because once you start learning those terms, I've seen people that because they started learning those terms, they went out and learned more of the actual language, just so that they could understand more of the culture behind the style that they were studying, which is another aspect that I've noticed, unfortunately, tends to get glossed over, is the culture of the country where the style comes from, whether it's China or Korea or Japan. There are, and especially in the West, people who just don't want to bother with that. I was very interested in knowing more about about both the Korean culture and the Chinese culture when I was studying, and the Japanese culture when I studied those fighting styles. So that's all. I've always been more willing to interest. I wish I had more of a gift for the languages, to be perfectly honest. I don't. The terminology most of the time is about all I can manage. But I didn't let that put me off. I didn't say, well, I don't want to have to learn a whole bunch of Chinese words, so I'm just not going to bother. That wasn't going to happen. I've even seen students from some schools, and unfortunately even teachers in some schools, that will use the terms karate and kung fu interchangeably. And I've seen some that don't even know the slightest difference one from another. I even knew one person who claimed to have had some training, who he didn't even know that Tai Chi, Taekwondo, and Muay Thai were different styles. He thought that because they all had a similar sounding word in their names, that they were the same style, just the name was different because they were in different countries, i.e. China, Korea, Thailand, respectively. And again, that was so unfortunate, because I don't think I ever actually convinced him that they were different styles. Even when I explained what the names meant, at least as far as the Chinese and Korean name, I honestly don't know what Muay Thai translates to in English, but I know Tai Chi means Grand Ultimate Fist, and Taekwondo means the art of hand and fist, or the art of hand and foot, I should say. So, there's that. But yeah, he actually thought that they were the same thing because they all had a word that sounded like Thai in them. I encourage all instructors to return to the usage of the traditional terminology. I encourage all instructors to make certain that their students have at least a rudimentary understanding of the history and origin of the style they're studying. I have seen people who've studied. I even knew someone who was a black belt in a particular style. I won't mention the style because I don't want to sound like I'm running down that particular style or the school, because it might have just been that instructor, because there are other schools, that teach that same style. But he had no idea of any of the history of his style. He didn't know where the style came from, not even its country of origin. He didn't know, who the founder of the style was. He didn't know anything about the history of the style. He didn't even know who his teacher's teacher was. And yet he had earned his black belt at that school. And I found that disappointing. I mean, I have seen other things that were more disappointing, but one in particular was there was a local school in town. Again, I won't mention the name because I don't want to interfere with their reputation. But at one point, the owners of the school decided they didn't want to run the school anymore. They didn't want to teach. So they sold the school, but they allowed the person who bought it to continue using their name. And during the several years that was going on, that school went downhill, because what the new owners did was they decided that, well, we're not going to worry about what anybody actually learns. If you've been here 3 months, you're going to get your orange belt. If you've been here 6 months, you're going to get your yellow belt. If you've been here 9 months, you're going to get your blue belt, and so on. And it didn't matter if they came every day or if they came once a month. That time frame passed, they got their next belt, period. Now, I'm not entirely certain what their reasoning was for that, but whatever it was flawed, because there were a lot of people running around claiming that they were high-ranking belts from this school who literally knew like 6 techniques. 3 punches, 2 blocks, and a kick, and that was all they knew, and they were brown, and they got their brown belt because they'd been there for 13 months or whatever. The only belt you actually had to test for was your black belt. You still had to test for that. So you still had to know something to get a black belt, but everything else didn't matter. And it's like, that did a great disservice to a lot of students, and a lot of people quit going there when that happened, because they didn't think it was fair that they were coming every day, spending 2-3 hours a day training, plus whatever time they were training at home. And this other guy who came once a month for 6 months was the same belt level as them, but didn't really know anything. So yeah, there are those are things that I have seen. But with that school, after that went on for a while, the original owners bought the school back and started teaching again, and the school went back to its former level of quality. So if you know the terminology, pass it along to your students. If you're teaching and your own instructor never taught you the proper terminology, find a resource and learn it. You will find that the rewards far outweigh the time and effort to obtain and disseminate this information. So this has been Alex, and this has been the Landfill, and I will be back soon.